Listen, if you've ever done what I've done, which is left the house without the proper deodorant on, you might find yourself in a smelling situation. And as a guy, that's not what you want, right? And and then you feel like the person next to you knows and the person on the other side of you knows. Everybody in the room knows. Even if they don't know, you don't want to feel like they know. Do you know what I'm saying? So Mando has got this crazy product where it protects you from odor for 72 hours. It stops odor before it starts. You can use their whole body deodorant. It's safe to use anywhere in your body. We're talking pits, we're talking thighs, we're talking belly buttons, we're talking down theirs. You know what I'm saying? Created by a doctor who saw firsthand how normal BO was being misdiagnosed and mistreated, it's clinically proven to block odor all day and all odor for 72 hours. Mando deodorant products include, there's a solid deodorant stick. There's also a spray deodorant, whatever you want. And by the way, it's baking soda free and it's paraben free, and we want to give you a nice little starter pack. So Mando starter packs are perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube of deodorant, 2 free products of your choice. There's a mini body wash, deodorant wipes, and free shipping. As a special offer to our listeners only, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with the exclusive code. That equates to 40% off your starter pack use, and this is great, okay? All you have to do is remember this code. It's Walsh, W-A-L-S-H. Walsh at shopmando.com. That's $5 off your starter pack for Mando at shopmando.com. Promo code Walsh.
This is Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde.
We are back for another episode of Agent Provocateur. I am with my partner in crime, Adam Wylde. Adam, how you doing?
Oh, I love being your partner in crime, by the way. I think that's an honored position, Allan. And I want to say, just got back from, we call it Allanfornia, but California last week. Had a great time. I know that we were like, what is it, a 5-hour drive, San Francisco to Los Angeles or something like that. It's really long, but I want to say that I can understand why you like living there. I get it, man. Steve was making Kevin Adams palm tree jokes the whole time. Like it's what a cool place. And how cool is it that, you walk into the arena and it's freezing and, it feels and it smells like at any arena anywhere else. And then you walk outside, you can be in your shorts, go golfing, do whatever it is you do. I get why players like playing there.
I graduated from McGill. And I decided to go to law school in California. I had a beaten up old Camaro, Chevrolet Camaro, with no air conditioning. Mm-hmm. And I solicited my younger brother to join me on the trek. We got in the car in Montreal. I had 3 duffel bags packed up on top of each other in the back seat with all of my Springsteen albums. And made the drive from Montreal to LA. Took us 10 days, rolled into LA around 9-10 p.m. at night, checked into a 2-star motel near downtown LA, had never been to LA before, didn't know a soul here, didn't have a relative, didn't have a friend, didn't have a contact. And 3 days later, started my first day of law school. And With all of that happening, I remember vividly calling my dad about a week or 2 into law school and saying, Dad, I am never going to leave California.
I thought it was going to be like, Dad, I miss you. And then he said, no, you got to stick it out. No, you were just like, this is it for me.
Yeah, and I'm been here now for almost 40 years.
Amazing. Now, Allan, one of the things that we sort of started to see towards the end of my California trip were rumors leaking out about a national rights deal in Canada. And for our American listeners, and I know there are a lot of you, you might not really care, but this affects you because it affects the whole league and it affects the salary cap. And Allan, when you look at a deal like this, what's been sort of put out there with the press conference yesterday, with ownership sources, is that they're happy with this deal. It's a 12-year deal, $7.7 billion US dollars. We don't need to talk about the Canadian dollars because everything in the NHL is done in USD, and so it's 7.7 million US dollars. It's a doubling of what the rights were for the last 12 years. And yet you've got some, I don't know if we call it criticisms or some questions about how we can actually call this a success, because they are trumpeting it like it's the second coming. For you, what are some of the holes in that argument?
So let's take a little step back first and talk about more fleshing out what this deal is. So I had heard from my sources amongst NHL ownership and general managers that at the last Board of Governors meeting, Gary had teased out that his expectation on the next Canadian rights deal will be 3x the current deal. And Gary is not known for overshooting or overpromising to his owners. So if he said that, he pretty much has that in the bag, right? So the numbers come out and they're around 2 to 2.2x the current deal. So what happened? Well, there is a very important carve out allowing for French language rights fees to be added onto this deal, which I'm assuming are going to increase over the current deal. And there is a carve out for a game of the week sublicense that will probably end up with Amazon, as they have taken over a game of the week a night here in Canada as well. So I think when you add up all of the carve outs, you're going to get very close to 3x overall. And it's not so much the amount of the rights fee that I would quibble with. It is the length of the deal. Why in an environment, in a universe where rights fees are exploding year over year, the ground under our feet are changing on a daily basis, and looking forward just 3, 4, 5 years is a very difficult task. Franchise fees are exploding. We've gone from Vegas at 500 million, Seattle 650 million, and the next two expansion teams in the NHL will be in the area of 1.5 billion. The cap is exploding because HRR is exploding. Why in the world would you lock the NHL rights in for 12 years?
Right.
You know, and the NHL has done this before. If keep in mind, the Canadian rights don't kick in the new deal for another year, because there's another year remaining on the old deal. So if the rights are increasing by 2.5 to 3, then next year's rights are undervalued because of the length of the deal by 2.5 to 3.
Right.
How many millions of dollars are being left on the table? When the NHL originally locked into that horrible, embarrassing, almost criminal NBC deal for 10 years at around 250 million rights fee per year, what they did is they left literally tens of millions to maybe even over $100 million of revenue on the table.
And that's per season, by the way.
And the players have no management rights. The players are not involved in the negotiation of these deals. And I mean the Players Association. This is strictly within the purview of the league. One interesting thing I noted in reviewing what has come out publicly on this deal is the new rights deal, like the old rights deal, is backloaded, which means the rights fee will start at a lower number under the average value of the deal. and will escalate over the years to where at the end of the deal will be at the highest number. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is there a reason for doing that other than if you have a big rights fee, like what happened in the NBA, all of a sudden come to fruition, it will cause the cap to go up even higher.
Yes.
And if I were a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not, but if I were, is the structure of this deal meant to have the greatest depressing impact on the rise of the cap going forward for the next 3 or 4 years? We know the cap is going up. We know the cap is exploding up. We've talked about it many times right here on this podcast. But if we had a big 2.53x number all of a sudden added to the Canadian rights fee starting in 2 years, the cap would be up several $1 million more than what has already been announced.
Yes. Yes, it would. And
no one has talked about that. No one has brought that up.
Not a single person. Allan, there going to be some people in the comments that respond to this, that see a clip of this on the internet floating around and go, "Oh my God, it's just an agent trying to tell us that, enough of this, because they already announced the cap's going up, whatever percentage over the next few years, right? 20% or something like that, maybe 25%. But your contention has always been it should already be there, right? Had it not been for COVID, it would already be there. And by locking in the rates with the NHLPA, which is what they did a few months ago, and there's a little wiggle room there, that $95.5 million, we still expect to go up from what that announced number is. The reality of the situation, Allan, is that this is one of those things where the NHL does actively look to do that, because we did hear from ownership, certain ownership sources through insiders, that they're concerned about not being able to spend to the cap anymore and other teams being able to. So this essentially flattens it out. Is that right?
There is no question that we are going to see teams that over the last 4 years became cap teams, meaning they spent to the cap every year, that are now going to become what we call budget teams, meaning they're going to have a budget set significantly below the upper limit, and they are not going to be allowed to spend over that number. And we're going to see that reality coming into play more and more. Right now, the spend across the league is about 95% of available cap dollars.
Okay.
And we're going to see that number go down at least a couple of percent as we go forward, which basically will render the entire escrow issue null and void. Okay. There will be no more escrow issue on the player side. And remember, there were years where it's been as high as 20% plus of their salary being escrowed, of their compensation for the year being escrowed in a third-party account, and ultimately most of it returned to the owners.
Right.
You make $1 million, you're getting only $800,000. $200,000 of that is sitting in a third-party escrow account. And when the reconciliation is done on HRR for the year, that $200,000 is returned to their owner.
Right. And so this is interesting too. I wondered, because it's seeming like Gary is trying to tie up loose ends before he goes. And this seems like a smart thing to do when you're going into a negotiation with the NHLPA, because as we found out from Pierre Lebrun yesterday on Twitter, they are resuming those negotiations this week. What kind of strength does that give the NHL from a negotiation position, having this rights deal locked up going into these NHLPA discussions, if any at all?
I think it's got some bearing on the discussions. Gary has not been quiet or cagey about where he expected these rights fees to go.
Yep.
Right. And again, I'm not quibbling with the 3x number. I just think that when we get past year 5 or 6 of this agreement, the Canadian rights are going to be woefully undervalued compared to what they would get in an open market. Right. And that's my issue with that. And I don't think Gary is really looking 5, 6, 12 years down the road.
What does he care?
He's also made it somewhat known that once this CBA is done, there will be in the next year or two a transition to a new commissioner in the NHL.
Right. Right. Why do the owners like this? Because Gary's Gary, but you when you look at Gary, you should look at, hey, Gary's the owners. He's the 32 owners. Why do they like this?
I think owners like having certainty and having that number on the board, no matter what happens in the economy, no matter what happens with tariffs, no matter what happens in a world with a lot of variables, economic variables at play all the time. Good economies, bad economies, booming economies. It is reassuring for owners to have that centralized revenue on the board. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, most ownership groups leverage their teams using league supplied credit facilities that the NHL has negotiated to manage their cash flow. So a lot of teams are operating on borrowed money when it comes to day-to-day operations, while the value of the franchise has been appreciating at a much higher rate of their credit facility. Mm-hmm. So it's just for many ownership groups, it's a license to print money.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing, but they're only realizing their gains when they cash out or when they re-up their new credit facility.
Now, have you heard anything, and this is, I'm putting you on the spot here, so if you don't have an answer, I totally understand. Have you heard anything about how the NHL felt about Rogers Sportsnet's coverage of the game and growth of it? Because obviously we've seen an explosion in the States in the last couple of years with how hockey is covered on ESPN, and specifically, actually, a lot of compliments go to TNT and their panel and the way that they do things. Amazon kind of burst onto the scene here in Canada this year and has done a really good job with the Monday night games. People really love those. They're doing things differently. I had heard that the NHL was not thrilled with, sort of the lack of movement. Have you heard anything on that part? And do you think there's anything in this deal that compels Rogers Sportsnet to go beyond the borders that they've already kind of trenched themselves in?
Well, I think there's a correlation between Rogers purchasing the entire MLSE in the recent past from jumping in with both feet on a new rights deal. Mm-hmm. I don't think one would happen without the other. But judging by, and certainly this isn't clinical or scientific at all in any way, but judging by the mentions on my Twitter account, I would say there is great unhappiness amongst the Canadian fan base to the quality of the broadcasts and most specifically the blackout issue, which is a very significant issue. So what motivation does Rogers have when they have exclusivity pretty much for the next 12 years to revamp, recreate, revitalize the product offering made to the fans? Not much.
Okay. And could the NHL, I mean, listen, we aren't involved intimately in those negotiations, but it feels like with 3 national nights a week, that's a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Saturday, if you were to parcel those out to 3 different broadcasters, and there are 3 different players, you have TSN, you have Sportsnet, and you've got Amazon, it feels, Allan, like maybe more money could have been made there. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any insight?
It's possible, but I also think TSN has thrown their hat in on the regional broadcasts. And I don't think that Bell Media had interest in bidding on the national rights.
Okay.
So when you think about it in that respect, to get top dollar, you usually need to have multiple people bidding and get into some kind of a live auction or bidding war on the rights. And I don't think that was ever a reality on the Canadian side. And I think that TSN is still going to be a big time player on the broadcast side, but they've thrown their hat in on the regionals.
Yeah, and when they sold their stake in MLSE, they agreed to split those regional rights for at least the Maple Leafs and the Raptors for the next 20 years. So I believe that's 19 years after this one. And beyond that, Allan, regional rights for TSN have been very profitable, whereas national rights for Rogers have not been directly profitable. But, and I wanted to throw this at you from a business perspective, if you're Ed Rogers and you're Tony Staffieri, so Ed owns Ed's the head of the Rogers Trust, which owns.
I thought you liked me. I thought you liked me.
I'm not saying you're like Ed. I don't know what Ed's like, but I will say, so Ed and Tony are the guys that are sort of heading this thing up, along with Colette Watson. And I think with Ed and Tony specifically, they might look at this and go, okay, if we spend, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, if we spend this much money on Canadian television rights, it sure boosts the asset value of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. It's like taking a $100 bill from one part of your wallet and then putting it in your pocket. You know, do you think that's part of what played into this?
100%. And if you look back on the previous rights deal, one of the reasons why it was not profitable, in my opinion, and the variable is something you just can't control, is how many years went by with no Canadian teams in the playoffs, and how many years went by with the Maple Leafs either not in the playoffs or eliminated in the first round.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. All right. Well, you know what? I mean, it's an interesting world. I mean, it's Gary's going to be able to go out with a bang the way he wants to go out, especially when this NHLPA deal is done. And assuming that it gets done relatively soon. I've heard they'd like to have it done by the draft. Both sides want to get it done. So, I mean, power to them, I guess. It's just a interesting way to do business. And I will be very curious to see, with the tariff war, which, basically started yesterday worldwide, how this all sort of plays out economically as well, because there might be nothing anybody can do. Asset values might just go down generally. So, Allan, moving on from that, I want to talk to you about offer sheets.
Yeah,
it's Thursday, April the 3rd, and there is an article that quotes you in The Athletic by one Michael Russo and some guy named Chris Johnson. I wonder where the hell he works.
I never heard of either gentleman.
And it speaks to, I guess, the sort of the big incident that happened last year between the Oilers and the Blues in August, which is the Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg contracts that were extended. Both players were RFAs. Both players chose to sign. Edmonton chose not to match on both players, but the St. Louis Blues did give them a little bit of extra compensation to go ahead with what they were already going to have to give them under league rules. Now, you called this the summer of offer sheets. Why?
Coming up.
This summer will be.
And what St. Louis did is they waited into August, where the Oilers did not have literally any significant available cap space.
Right.
And for the Oilers to match, so there's no cap space. St. Louis tenders 2 offer sheets to Edmonton players who were restricted free agents on the same day. So that in and of itself created a pressure situation where the clock started running for Edmonton to decide what they were going to do, whether they would match or not. And their options were trading other assets in a very hurried period of time when the entire league knows they're under pressure to give up assets, to create the cap space, to pay these players to match, which means they're not going to get much value for whatever they're trying to sell.
Right.
So it put them with it put them between a rock and a hard place, basically. Yep. And Stan Bowman's quoted in this same article you're referencing, saying, if we had matched these 2 offer sheets, we would not have been able to ice a team.
Right.
We wouldn't have been able to put a team on the ice. We had no choice. So Doug Armstrong brilliantly did his homework and knew if he dropped these 2 offer sheets on the same day, it wasn't a matter of whether Edmonton liked the players or not, or thought the number, the compensation in the offer sheets was fair or high or something they would agree to. They just didn't have the ability to match.
Right.
They didn't have the ability to match. That is a much different situation than what we saw previously in the offer sheet world. And that is, remember Shea Weber's massive, what was it, 104 million offer sheet?
Yes.
Philadelphia. And Nashville at the time was cash strapped and didn't have, they had like 27 owners. And there was what Philadelphia was doing was saying, we know those guys are not going to be able to come up with the signing bonus and the front-loaded nature of this deal, and that they have the cap space, but this is the way we're going to be able to get them. And Nashville matched. And that really killed that way of thinking amongst ownership around the league and general managers. Well, if Nashville, that didn't have any money in that ownership group at the time, was willing to match, then this is a fool's exercise where the goal is not writing an offer sheet to have the player stay where he is. You're only going to do it if you really believe you've got a very good chance, I'd say at least 75% certainty of getting the player.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not worth it. Okay. But what we're going to see happening here is, the perfect scenario is a similar scenario than what we saw in Edmonton. Significant RFA player, not eligible for salary arbitration yet. So the team can't file for arbitration and take him out of the offer sheet market, letting this situation go into August and having a team with most of their cap space spent, and then an offer sheet hits. Significantly, if you look at Detroit last summer, they had Sider and Raymond.
Yes.
2 significant RFAs, not yet eligible for salary arbitration. So Steve Yzerman couldn't file on them and take them out of the RFA market. I think if you look at the way Detroit allocated their cap dollars and the timing of that allocation, Steve waited until he had those guys signed, and he kept a significant amount of cap space open, equal to around what he signed those guys for, just in case some other team tendered an offer sheet at one or both of those guys simultaneously.
So what's the strategy from an agent's perspective? Because I was thinking about this on the sort of the drive-in this morning, and I thought, okay, if I'm the agent and you have to remember, I gave this 20 minutes thought, you've given this 20 years thought, so mine's going to be a little half baked, but
30 years.
30 years.
Okay.
So would it, if you got let's say you got a young stud player, we got one in Toronto, his name's Matt Nyes. Just scored his 26th goal, 50th point last night. He's a beast on the first line. He scores, he hits, he's huge, bit of a rock star, that archetype of player. And again, I know that you don't represent Matthew Nyes, and I'll just put that out there, okay? Is the agent play to wait until July 1st is over and hold out, and wait to see if you're going for maximum dollars here, wait to see if another team tries it? How do you handle a situation like that? Because, NHL general managers and owners have been reticent to do this. Now, as you mentioned in the article, with Mikko Rantanen off the market, there is some high-end talent out there. Mitch Marner will be available. Aaron Ekblad will be available. Maybe Sam Bennett might be available. Everybody seems to re-sign in Florida. They like it there. Who can blame them? Palm trees. But, Allan, if somebody's going to do this as an agent, how do you navigate that? What's the strategy?
I would consider that a trade secret.
Okay.
And I don't know how much of that I want to reveal today.
Fair enough. But there are, I would assume, multiple strategies. Yes?
There are. And I think that this is a great topic for our first show of next year, which will happen sometime late August, early September. And we can revisit the summer of offer sheets that I'm predicting now. Mm-hmm. And let's see if it comes to fruition, how it came to fruition, or whether I'm just, as many people think, full of hot air.
Now, let me ask you this. You talk to general managers all the time. How do they feel about it? Have you noticed a change in them?
I think that general managers always said in the cap era that they see offer sheets as a tool, mm-hmm. but they always believed that other than in some very rare circumstances, to go and tender one to a player will just lead to the other team matching. So it was an exercise in futility. I think that in many ways, they were right. Mm-hmm. And in some very significant ways, they were wrong. And remember, the attitude before the cap era, before 2005, was, even though there were a few notable offer sheets back then, between 1995 and 2005, they were frowned upon by the league and by Gary, and there was retaliation threatened behind the scenes against anybody who would do that because they were seen as inflationary, right? You're inflating the market. No cap.
Got it.
You're making it more expensive for every other team to do business.
Right.
And there was a real backlash against anybody who even thought about it. But in the cap era, you cannot make the argument that offer sheets are inflationary, because the only thing we are doing here is discussing the allocation of dollars within the system to players. But at the end of the day, it's still 50-50. HRR is split 50% to the owners, 50% to the players.
Right.
If one player gets more, another player is getting less, but it still comes out to 50-50. So you cannot make the argument that an offer sheet in and of itself is inflationary, right? It may impact the defense market. It may impact the goalie market. It may impact, 23-year-old wingers who could score 30 goals and act as a comparable that will raise the market for these players, but it's not coming out of the overall dollars allocated to the players. It's still 50-50.
Right. Okay. And I remember famously Kevin Lowe and Brian Burke almost fought each other over the Dustin Penner offer sheet that Edmonton extended.
It was even more than that. What Kevin Lowe, there was a backstory to this that nobody remembers.
Okay.
And Mike Gillis was a very high profile agent before, and there's a little bit of a Leaf connection here, before becoming general manager of the Vancouver Canucks. And Mike is a friend of mine. Mike represented Michael Nylander.
Right.
And Michael Nylander became an unrestricted free agent and entered into an agreement with the Edmonton Oilers to sign as a free agent. I believe it was a 5-year deal in the neighborhood of $5 million a year or $5.5 million a year. We're going back a long time here, so my memory on the exact term and money is a little bit hazy. And Mike confirmed the deal in writing by email, with an email to Kevin Lowe, the general manager in Edmonton, saying, confirming we have a deal. Here's the term. Here's the number. Edmonton prepared the SPC, the standard player contract, sent it to the agent and player, to Nylander and to his agent, and announced on July 1, the Edmonton Oilers have agreed to terms with Michael Nylander. Michael Nylander is an Edmonton Oiler. And a day goes by and the SPC is not returned. Mm-hmm. And another day and all kinds of excuses are being made, not by Mike Gillis, but by the player. The fax machine doesn't work. I have the contract now. But this is the issue and the contract is not being returned. And you're now 2 days past July 1. And all of a sudden, the Washington Capitals announce that they have signed Michael Nylander to a UFA contract for 1 year less term and for less dollars than he had agreed to with Edmonton.
Wow.
And Kevin Lowe and the Edmonton Oilers lost their mind.
Of course.
Lost their mind. And they took this to Gary and they said, we had a deal. Here's the email. It was confirmed by the agent. There was a arbitration case involving goalie Mike Vernon that had happened years before. And the arbitral ruling was, and this was an arbitration under the auspices of the system arbitrator of the NHL, written decision, and it stands, the holding of the arbitrator was a contract is not a contract until the player signs the standard player contract, and that contract is filed with the league central registry and accepted. Okay. Until that happens, there is no deal. So every time you see agreed to terms, that's a euphemism that everyone should be aware. It means the player has verbally agreed to the new deal, but it hasn't been signed yet and filed with the league.
Right.
Right. And July 1, many teams announce signings of free agents agreed to terms, and the paperwork hasn't even been done yet.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And it's always a gentleman's agreement. But every team, every player, and every agent knows, going all the way back to Nylander and before that to Vernon, and we're talking now about the 1990s, all the way back then, there is a ruling, and it is the law of the land in the NHL. You do not have a binding contract between team and player until the player signs the contract and it's filed with Central Registry. So a player could say, I agree to the deal. A player can go on Sportsnet or TSN and talk about how he's agreed to terms with the club. An agent could send an email in writing saying, this is the deal. We confirming the deal. We have a deal. There is no contract until it is signed by the player, filed with the league, period.
Wow. Okay.
Right? Okay. So Washington signs Michael Nylander, right?
Yep.
Edmonton goes to Gary. Gary basically says, you guys know the rule. You don't have a signed contract. Washington has a signed contract with the player. You got no case. You don't have the player. So as a response to that, Edmonton, Kevin Lowe, basically fuck the league and fuck the fact that you guys don't want us doing offer sheets.
Okay.
Dustin Penner was a restricted free agent hanging out there available. They offered him a massive offer sheet.
Yep.
And signed him and announced it. And Kevin Lowe and Brian Burke, who were very close friends, very good. Kevin Lowe did not call Brian Burke before it was announced to say, I just want to give you a heads up. I am tendering an offer sheet to your player. And in many of the offer sheet situations, the GM has given the other GM a heads up.
And that's in order to, that's professional courtesy.
Just professional courtesy. Hey, we're giving this player an offer sheet. It's agreed to. It's being signed. I just want to give you a heads up before it's announced, so you're not blindsided by it. Professional courtesy. That's all. And I believe Doug Armstrong called Stan Bowman before the offer sheet was announced to say, just heads up, this is what we're doing.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Kevin Lowe did not do that with Brian Burke. It was the fact that he had gone against the code that existed in the NHL at the time. Thou shalt not ever tender offer sheets under penalty of death, or at least a fight. And Brian Burke said, I am going to be in this city. You're going to be there. I'm renting a barn, and you and I'm challenging you to a barnyard fight. And he was deadly serious.
I know. Yeah,
Brian Burke was deadly serious. I've got the barn. I'm going to rent it. You're going to meet me there, and we're going to have it out. I'm going to beat the shit out of you.
I remember the quote at the time. I think I was watching SportsCenter or something, and it was like, just because he's had a grenade thrown in his lap doesn't mean he needs to throw it into mine. I think that's what he said. And yeah, that's fascinating. Okay. Well, Allan, it has seemed for years like something that a smart GM who was maybe aggressive and willing to break the mold would do. And it's so funny that a guy like Doug Armstrong, who obviously does do his homework, by the way, riding high, 10-game winning streak as of this recording. It seems so interesting that it would come from somebody who's been around for so long. I would have expected a Kyle Davidson, a Kyle Dubas, like one of the younger general managers to do it. That it came from Doug Armstrong, and that it was executed flawlessly, I think is amazing. And if you look at the impact that Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg have had on his team, I mean, I don't think they're in this position if Dylan Holloway's not scoring over 60 points this year. And Philip Broberg's been spectacular. He really came into his own in the playoffs last year. obviously had some injury stuff, but I got to say, it seems to have worked out real well. And the NHL is a copycat league.
Absolutely. And I think you're right, Adam. No one can make the argument that these players added to the St. Louis roster. And what makes it so appealing, and I mentioned this in the article that was published today, general managers have the option to offer a lot of term and a lot of money in an auction for UFA players who might be 30, 31, 32 years of age versus an RFA without salary arbitration rights who is 22, 23, 24 years of age. Mm-hmm. You get the option of, if you're successful, getting the player in the absolute prime of his career.
Yes.
And I've had NHL GMs show me their internal analytics saying that players start the inevitable decline, analytically at least, around 28 years of age. And that is a general thinking that some GMs carry. If I'm talking about a 30-year-old player, he's 30 now, analytically we are tracking the decline of production or the decline of their overall performance just based on age. And here we have a chance of getting maybe one of the top 23-year-olds in the league.
It's a pretty interesting proposition. And there are outliers to that. Your client, Marc-Andre Fleury, who we'll get to in a second, is one of them. But yeah, on the whole, that's when it starts, right? Like that's the window. So we would be remiss in not bringing up that the compensation for an offer sheet is a formulaic. It exists in the CBA. It's tied to every year's average league salary. Mm-hmm. So the thresholds go up every single year. I've had some people in the media go to the latest iteration of the CBA and send me the thresholds, and I'm like, you're 10 years behind the times. Okay. So the thresholds get reset every year, tied to average league salary. And people need to also keep in mind the draft choice compensation is not 2025. People are looking at it now saying, oh, he doesn't have his 2025 second round pick or his first round pick. He can't do it. It's 2026. Right. So that's interesting. As of right now, I'm looking at Puckpedia for this. What Allan's talking about, if you offer a player over $11.452 million, it's 4 first-round picks in the next 5 drafts starting in 2026. So that'll be this summer. If you see
and it has to be your native pick. It can't be a pick you acquire from another team.
Correct. Yes. So you're going to have to, it has to be your pick. If you want it, if the offer comes in between 9.1 and 11.45, then it's 2 first rounders in the next 3 drafts. It's your 26th second rounder and your 26th third rounder. Between 6 and 9, it's a first, a second, and a third in 2026. Again, all native picks. If it's between 2.2 and 4.58, it's a second round pick. That's when things start to get really interesting because you get depth players like a Dylan Holloway or players that haven't quite established themselves like a Philip Broberg. And you go, oh, well, $4.5 million, that gets me a pretty good play. Second round pick. I mean, I could always use that second round pick in a trade next year. No guarantee I'm going to get this player, or I could use it to draft. No guarantee I'm going to get a player this good. And then I think it's really interesting at the lower end, 1.5 to 2.2 is a third round pick. Below 1.5, it's none. And that's really cool because there are a lot of really good players that make in that area that fill out teams' rosters and essentially that makes you a UFA.
What I've always argued to GMs, somewhat unsuccessfully, is there are teams that are in desperate need of players at the minimum at 775, 800. And there are restricted free agents out there that the team that holds the player's rights, Group 2 rights, just cannot afford to pay the player $1.2 million or $1.3 million. Mm-hmm. And I've always believed if you look at all the NHL teams, all 32, the top 6 forwards on each team are all really good players.
Yep.
Right. And they really do match up against each other. But the difference makers are the depth and the skill in the other attributes in the bottom 6. Those are the players who are available, and you can steal a player from another team and it won't cost you anything. Right. And a team that needs to have a 4th line player at $775, if you can afford to pay that guy, you have to overpay him.
Yep.
Right? Like, let's be straight up here. You're going to have a guy that might only have a value of $800 and you got to pay him 1.4. But if you have the cap space to do that, you're making your team in a competitive atmosphere where everything you're doing as a GM is to make your team better.
Yep.
Right? You can be adding a guy that can be a difference maker for you.
29, it looks like 29 of the 32 teams are able to go above $11.45 million. That they're eligible to do this. Whether or not they're cap compliant is a different thing. Interestingly, it becomes harder when you get between $9 and $11 million. Only about 15 teams can do that because obviously it requires different rounds and different picks and stuff. So all that's available at Puckpedia. But Allan, very fascinating stuff. Finally, I want to talk about Marc-Andre Fleury. And obviously we're in the last month of his career, we think, unless he somehow says at the end of this, you know what, I had a really good time this year. He's also going to the playoffs, so it could be 3 more months. But regular season, it's been a really amazing sort of goodbye, because he is beloved in a way that not a lot of players in the history of the game ever have been, to the point where Alexander Ovechkin stopped his team from going off the ice and said, I want you all to go over there and shake his hand. And that was a rivalry between those two players, especially when Marc-Andre was in Pittsburgh. I wanted to know how you felt when you saw that.
It was a very touching moment. And it was a very classy thing for Ovi to do. I know it meant a lot to Flower. We talked about it afterwards, and Flower talked a little bit about the love-hate relationship that exists with Ovi. I think Ovi scored more NHL goals against Marc-Andre Fleury than any other goalie in the NHL. They certainly had their battles, Pittsburgh and Washington. Vegas in their inaugural season played Washington in the Stanley Cup Finals. Mm-hmm. And the two of them had their little battles in the pregame warm-up. But at the end of the day, I think great players respect other great players' careers.
Yes.
And what Ovechkin said to Flower as they embraced at center ice was, 1 more year. Come on, Flower, 1 more year.
What, is Flower at least thinking about it?
I'm not going to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh man. Well, it was a beautiful thing to watch, Allan, and very, very cool. And listen, Minnesota Wild going to the playoffs. Be very, very interesting. When Kaprizov gets back, some of the injuries they've had, they're going to be a really interesting team to watch. With the start they had, they've been bitten a little bit. It's going to be a very cool playoff. Are you, this time of year, do you start to get excited like the rest of us do? I could kind of, for me, it's like, I can smell blood in the water. Like, let's go. How are you feeling?
I am ticking off the days. I am looking forward to the playoffs. At the end of the day, I mean, we've talked about this before. I watch 5, 6, 7 games a night.
Yep.
Simultaneously. I love the game. I love going to games. I love being around the game. It's the greatest blessing that that I've had in my life, and I consider myself extremely fortunate. But deep down, I love a good playoff series. I love playoff hockey, and I'm really looking forward to it this year.
Beautiful. Well, listen, Allan, we're going to catch up with you a couple of times before the playoffs start. So it's not like this is going to be the last that we see you, but lots to talk about. Thanks so much for today, and looking forward to our next episode already.
You got it. Great seeing you, Adam, and great conversation. I enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.
This has been Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde. Follow Allan Walsh on Twitter @WalshA. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts by searching Agent Provocateur and hitting the subscribe button. YouTube.com/SDPN.